Okay, welcome to Module 3, which is how to give personal feedback. In the previous two modules, we covered how to judge, or like what is philosophically and conceptually and mechanically judging. So like if you, and the second thing is how to arrive at a justification and give that justification to the teams. So if you haven't watched those two things, I would really advise you go back to those modules and check them out. In this module, we're going to cover specifically how to give personal feedback and what are the best practices. So for context, this is after the debate is over, after a call is explained, usually teams will come to, well, in most cases, the chair judge, but also the panelist judges, and ask for personal feedback in terms of what they could have improved, what they could have done better or improved when it comes to the debate. It's an extremely important part of debating because, firstly, people themselves develop more, so we're pushing the game more to more qualitatively better heights, better like performance, better speeches. So like this is the ultimate end goal of why we're doing debating. But also secondly, it's a good way for people to like interpersonally exchange communication, you know, become friends. And this I may say this like kind of like a robot, but honestly, for many new speakers particularly, or the speakers that are on a medium level, them being able to talk to a judge who is like a person of authority, more experienced than them, in some cases even more older than them, really helps them feel good and feel welcome within the debating community. So judges that try to improve the way they give personal feedback are like good judges. Judges who don't provide any or don't really care are not so good judges. So yeah, so it's a good thing you're watching this, and I hope this will be helpful for you. So similarly to the previous two videos, what are the goals that we have when we're doing this? So let's try to think about this. The first and most basic thing is that we're trying to clearly communicate the areas of improvement so that the person to whom we're speaking clearly understands what we're trying to explain to them in terms of what the problems were when they were debating or developing the case, and so that they understand the issue that we're trying to outline. The second is that we need to outline suggestions for improvement. This could either be short-term or long-term. We're going to dissect both. The third thing is that you need to also outline alternative arguments or strategy or whatever that they could have done within the round. And finally, to be empathetic, but to not sugarcoat things for them, because at the end of the day, these people they need to improve. Whether it's like adults in university, but even high school kids, when we're talking about, it's important for them to know the truth so that they can improve and become better. That doesn't mean that we have to be, you know, assholes, but we can be. We should strive to be empathetic, but still telling the truth. So let's look at each and every one of these goals and how we're able to achieve them. So let's look at how to clearly communicate the areas of improvement. The first and most crucial thing is to make sure that you reference aspects to the debate and you connect to the call. Even if the call itself is over, your job is not done. Maybe they didn't necessarily understand the call, or maybe they are new and you explained the call, but this is just like a foreign language to them, the way that you're explaining things. So it's super important for you to put it in the most recent context to them, because they can visualize and understand where you are coming from. Examples of this, for example, that I have outlined, is to just tell them, you had this logical leap in your case, or logical hole or burden that you didn't explain, and that is why you took the third, right? This is something I explained in the call, because if you don't have this burden, I can't credit your extension, and you lose out to top half, even if you have good rebuttals to CO. Let's say this is the summarization. Here is how you explain this this burden. First reason you could have given is blah, blah, blah. Second reason you could have given is blah, blah, blah. And then finally, after you explain these two reasons, it's important to give a nuance to them. So a nuance might be this and that, and etc. etc. Or another example might be if, like, well, CO responded to your case and you didn't respond back. Here's how either A, you could have responded back to those responses, so you could have handled it and protect your case. And secondly, here's how you could have responded to their case to beat them back. And yeah, this is important because firstly, you are providing yourself as an authority figure to them, because you can clearly reference the debate that's going on and the debate that happened, and it's almost as if you are a doctor and they're sick and you are pointing out to where the sickness is and what kind of problems do people have. But the second thing is that it's easy for them to visualize and understand where are the areas of improvement. If you are a new judge, let's say, or you are a panelist, while the chair judge may be giving the call, it might be a good idea, for example, on another sheet of paper, you to write down areas of improvement for each particular team based upon the case that they have given, so that when they come and ask you, you can at least give some suggestions. If you're a more experienced judge, these things like should be very easy for you, but it's also always a good idea, you know, like to check yourself and to try to improve and to make sure that you're doing this in the best possible way. The second thing is just to use like words that are standardized to us. Now, importantly, there is like this trap here where, for example, you know, we might be using too much debating terminology, like your delta was small or your solvency wasn't big enough or things like that, which not everyone particularly knows and understands. So maybe the grain of salt here with this explanation is to, if people don't get these words, if you feel like they're not getting it, then maybe you should explain delta means change, solvency means change, impact means why your argument is important, and blah, blah, blah. But these words are efficient because they can efficiently communicate the problem that you're trying to outline in this particular moment. So when you say, for example, you didn't explain this burden, you didn't clearly characterize to me X thing, you didn't impact your case, you didn't provide weighing, it's something like a mutual communication and mutual language that if it otherwise did not exist, communication would be very abstract and would be very weird. Because like, for example, just think about it this way. Let's look at example A. You just telling someone you didn't prove your case. And look at example B, which is your case has 3 burdens. It's 1, 2, 3. I think you gave sufficient explanations for 1 and 3, but you didn't give sufficient explanation for 2. The explanation you could have given are structural reason 1, 2, 3. This is much more clearer and much more deeper in terms of explanation when you're using this terminology and dissecting it, as opposed to you didn't prove your argument. Effectively, these two sentences mean the exact same thing. They are not different, but the way that you communicate it and the certain words that you're trying to utilize give a different understanding and greater detail to what you're trying to say. Now, the elephant in the room is, okay, but this is like, you're talking about extremes here, right? Where, for example, the team didn't do anything. I think a majority of debates it's actually pretty clear because many teams just don't do one of those things to begin with. So, for example, if we look at the trend of non-rebuttal, you could easily give a lot of personal feedback when it just comes in terms of rebuttal, because not many teams majority of teams are not responding. But let's say we're talking about like mid-tier teams. The way that you explain this is to try to differentiate the level of explanation that they have and how it's not enough, basically. So, and this is also like the sandwich technique. So, for example, let's say we're looking at the example of they provide a characterization within the debate. They're characterizing X actor works on this particular way, and they're giving inherent characteristics of X actor. However, they don't provide likelihood analysis, or the likelihood analysis which they provide is not that strong. In both of these cases, you can tell them, look, I understand that you characterize this in a meaningful way, and this is something that we did account for as a contribution, and we do value it. However, the problem is that you also have to prove the likelihood of your characterization, not just asserting it. And here we look at both scenarios. Either A, you could tell them, since you didn't provide any likelihood analysis and opposition challenged you based on this characterization, then they're attacking a premise within your case, and this was a premise that you needed to explain. So the area of improvement that I can showcase to you is to not just characterize, but provide likelihood analysis as to why your characterization is likely. Or if it's the second case where they do provide some reasoning, you need to explain to them why the reasoning isn't sufficient enough and what could have been potentially better reasoning. But the second part is more on the other slide. So to wrap up, make sure you reference aspects of the debate, use standardized language, and when we're talking about margins, like when we're talking about mid-tier teams and like closer margins, try to outline where the explanation like reaches and where it stops. Like where does it need more? Why does it need more? And how, like, why is this a point of improvement to them? I hope the characterization point is a good visualization of this. Another example might be they explain an argument, but they don't impact it, or they impact it very, very narrowly. They provide weighing, but they don't explain the weighing, and things like that. Usually, most of these things come down to the level of explanation to which teams give, and how the different levels of explanations compare within each other. But also, if you already have the call previously, then you most likely already have a very good way of summarizing where the analysis starts or stops, and you can continue with that. But this is just like, it's kind of weird because these things are all like obvious to me, and I really haven't been talking that much about judging to people. But I assume that maybe, especially for newer people, these things are hard. So like, please comment like if I'm explaining these things well. Like if you need, let's say, a more comprehensive explanation to this, since I'm not sure if I'm just to me, all, like I said, to me all these things are obvious, but maybe to some people they're not obvious, so maybe a greater degree of explanation could be necessary. Cool. So we have clearly articulated which are the areas of improvement. Then we need to provide short-term suggestions. So an important disclaimer is that sometimes short-term and long-term overlap between each other. So if, for example, a team didn't explain a burden within their case, or they're struggling with analyzing, you both need to provide a short-term and long-term solution to this, i.e. you need to explain how they could have analyzed this and how they could have improved in analysis. Sometimes it's not the case, but it's important to differentiate when you're providing them a solution that they can incorporate now, and to be real with them and to explain a solution that need to incorporate in the long term. Which we'll talk more about in the other slide. But let's first dissect the short-term one. But the reason you need to point this out is that so that they comprehensively understand, okay, this short-term fix is just a short-term fix for this tournament. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't work. But the real work will have to start after this tournament is done. So the first thing is that you can provide them easy fixes. So these are things, for example, of just asking yourself questions. Okay, they have a very messy way of speaking where they don't have a structure. Well, just telling them, okay, you can, for example, divide your speeches into like first responses, then analyzing arguments, or if you have two arguments, first analyzing one, then the other, or like outlining, and just like the way that you are writing, just setting numbers and bullet points so that they differentiate how they're doing. And to do this, you can just ask them a simple question like, can I check your notes? And if you like look at their notes and they're not writing the correct way, let's call it like that, even though there isn't a single correct way, but let's say they're, for example, writing very narrowly where you literally cannot physically understand what they're writing, you could tell them, write with big letters, write with bullet points, do things like that. If, for example, they're not using a timer while they're prepping, tell them take a timer and do that. If, for example, I don't know, they are dividing arguments, because this is apparently something that teams do, which is very strange to me, and they're analyzing both of these arguments rather than collectively coming to what the truth is. This is also like a problem. You can tell them like, don't do this, guys. This is just absurd. Importantly, you have to use the consultative approach here. So like you need to ask them questions in order to get close to what is the problem right now. You could also use this consultative approach for the long-term things, but the nature of the questions have to be around the lines of the short-term. So sometimes I straight up ask teams, why did you analyze this the way that you did? Like what is the reason? What is your thought process? Why did you come to this particular argument? So that I'm best able to understand and provide to them advice. Importantly, listening with intention, I think that's how people say it, is super important here. So like you intently listen and understand what they're saying so that you can provide the best feedback to them. The second thing is just like give general good advice in debating. I'm not sure how else to phrase it, but for example, like if they're just running arguments, just ask them, okay, why are you running this argument? Why do you think that, for example, this impacts the most amount of people? Do you think that, for example, the harm is super bad? What is the strategic reasoning as to why you are running the argument that you chose to run? Or let's say if they're running the right case, but they just fail at running it and their closing is able to vertically extend to them, ask them, okay, did you guys, for example, ask yourself, what are the burdens of this argument? Did you guys, for example, ask yourself what analysis is most crucial to prove? Maybe they focused on one burden and gave analysis there, but that's not a crucial burden. That's an easy burden, and they let go of the harder burden, which is harder to prove. So like just giving them these general things and saying like these are things that you can incorporate now by just asking yourself these questions is a good way to give them, is a good way of like providing them like good advice. So the third bullet point here is about situations where, for example, they totally screwed up. So for example, they repeated their opening, or they ran a non-comparative argument, or they like totally misunderstood the motion, and things like that. So like if we go to the goal section, this is the point number 3, which is outlining alternative strategy that could be done. And so I know there's a spectrum here. Certain cases it's super obvious what they needed to do. And especially like the cool thing about British parliamentary debating is that if opening government doesn't do a good job, maybe closing government does, and you can just tell them, just do what closing government did, you know, like they explained their burdens, they analyzed, they impacted, blah blah blah. But like that's like kind of a cop-out response. It's not particularly good, even though in 90% of the situations this is enough. So I think there's the following thing that judges face as a problem, for at least from what I understand, and that is that they don't really know what to tell teams in this particular segment. And like don't worry, this is perfectly fine, because at the end of the day, your first job is to make sure you arrive at the right call, and then your second job is to actually like give the feedback to people. And like less experienced judges fail to do both, like fail to simultaneously make sure they reach the right call and give adequate advice. The number one question that you can ask yourself is, what did you have to hear to be persuaded for this? So let's say opening government ran this case. What kind of analysis did you have to hear to vote for them? What kind of responses did you have to hear to vote for them? What kind of weighing did you have to hear to vote for them? And you can just simply ask yourself this question, think about it for some time. And here are two possibilities. Either one, you hear, like you reach a conclusion, which is that, okay, in order for this to win, I need to hear this analysis, and the way you need to explain it is this. Or there isn't such a possibility for the argument that they're running. It's impossible for you to be persuaded based upon this argument, because, I don't know, it's non-comparative. There's inherent problems with the argument. Like they're just repeating their opening, blah, blah, blah. So in this case, you need to ask yourself, okay, what in general types of arguments or argument do I have to hear within this debate in order to be persuaded by the teams in the debate, and then you can explain this to them. Now, pro tip here. You need to give the disclaimer, which is, this is not what I want to hear, but this is what came to my mind, you know? So, and you could need to say, there are obviously other reasons, other arguments to be made. This doesn't mean that I'm biased or for anything. In reality, you are pretty biased. This is exactly what you wanted to hear. But like in order to make sure that teams don't thank you in the feedback or something like that, you can give that, because that's things that many judges care about, even though you probably shouldn't. But yeah, this is just a thing that you can do, and in order to provide to them the actual thing that they could have run. Now, there are just bad motions. Like there are motions that, for example, don't have a bottom half. There are motions that, for example, are super overweighted. In situations like these, and if you like literally can't figure out anything and you've tried your best, it's perfectly fine to say, look, I'm not the CA of this competition. I don't set the motions. I think this is a like very bad motion. I can't really think of figure something. You just took a bad beat. You know, like this is something you could tell them, like they just didn't have luck. I noticed the teams like prefer it this way, because like at least you're honest with them. Obviously, you should probably try. You should do your best. This shouldn't be a reason for you to just randomly hate on the CAs and say, oh, they gave bad motions, even though debaters really do that. You should try to be more of a, like, as honest as you possibly can. Like, if you cannot honestly figure out an argument, then maybe it's a better idea for you just to be honest with the teams, but really try to figure out something. Cool. This is for short-term suggestions. Then long-term suggestions. before I get into that, it's just important to note that the best version of this would be if you were to see patterns of behavior. So let's say you judge the team multiple times at a competition or multiple times throughout competitions, where, for example, you've seen them, I don't know, not impacting their claims, you've seen them missing burdens, you've seen them struggling with rebuttal, you've seen them not weighing and things like that. Like if you see patterns of this, you can explain to the teams these types of patterns. So there are basically two things that you can outline as long-term suggestions. The first is just to give them drills based on the gap. And usually these are very simple things. If they don't analyze enough, do motion correcting. If they don't respond or weigh, watch whip speeches and good whip speeches and just try to modulate and copy them. If they, for example, I don't know, they never set up the debate or something like that, just explain to them, get a bunch of motions and ask yourself how would it be best to set up this debates, or give them debates to watch that are with good setup and things like that. So like this is what you, in the long term, you can do. Just to note, it's best to have both the short-term suggestions and the long-term suggestions together, because they're your best catering to the needs of your client in this particular case, which is the debater. But secondly, and you shouldn't really be like scared to do this, if there is like incompatibility, maybe you should suggest them to experiment. Maybe to switch speaker position, maybe to change the way they're writing, maybe judge more, maybe try out debating with other people and things like that. Especially if it's earlier in the prep season, or if their goals are, let's say, in 2 years, it's important to communicate to them to try out things. If it works, then they should stick with that module. If it doesn't, then they probably shouldn't. You shouldn't be scared of doing this, because at least you're providing them some kind of options to do, and some food for thought, or that they can go back to talk within their society or amongst themselves or with their coach if they have one, and discuss these things. But it's important to give them long-term suggestions if you can, and not just leave it off, here's what you could have done at this debate. No, just also try to explain of, here's what you do in these types of motions, these types of debates, these types of things. Cool. So I think that's it. So let's do a quick recap. Based on all of this information, you should be able now to clearly communicate areas of improvement, outline the suggestive improvement that you want, both like short-term and long-term, outline alternative strategy and arguments, and to be empathetic with them, but not sugarcoating. So yeah, I hope this really helps. But honestly, the best thing is just to judge a lot of debates and see how people give personal feedback and try to modulate it. Judge a lot of spars. If you do it for enough of a long time, you should be able to be fine. And finally, like, be humble. Like, obviously there's something to learn. Obviously there's a better way of phrasing things. Obviously there may be some like arguments and ideas that are worth suggestion, and not that like you are helping people out this way. People are investing a lot of this hobby. People are, especially teams that like go to your worlds or like local majors and things like that. You should be humble and empathetic to these people and try to help them out as much as you can. Great. Hope this was helpful. See you in the next video.